let me make another suggestion here. So you mentioned Marx, and what we see in Marx is an overestimation, a serious overestimation of the power of reason.
Yeah.
And now reason understood as a productive and political principle. And I mean, obviously there's a religious background because it's a secularization of the Christian story. But I think there are several elements here. And by the way, this goes back to Plato's Republic as well. We can talk about that. But the idea is that, okay, we're going to have a heaven on earth. We're going to have a paradisical society where all men are brothers and so on.
And everyone's needs are met.
Right.
Whatever the hell that means.
But here's the problem. It is going to be realized by human political productive action. And the difficulty there is, so first of all, it's not emerging organically, okay? It's a political constructivism. So the best society will not emerge organically, but it's to be brought into being by man. Now, it's to be brought into being by man in a particular time and in a particular place.
By particular men.
Right, by particular men. And when you put those constraints on it, you drastically limit the possibilities within that society because it's got to be producible, it's got to be sustainable, it's got to fit the particular parameters, all these kinds of things. Add on to that the delusion that human beings are not, in fact, let's say, radically local beings who form the most meaningful bonds in particular ways. Marriage,
family,
etc.
town.
Right. But we're universal, right?
Yeah, right.
And finally, you have this kind of divinization of man because after all, we're going to realize heaven on earth. So,
as you said, we can produce a centralized authority, which falls out of the presumptions you just described, that's going to have the computational power necessary to pull off the task.
Exactly.
Which is, that just
huge.
Just that claim is preposterous, right? But I like the way you formulate that because what you're pointing out is that for the system that's proposed to make itself manifest, it has to meet a series of increasingly likely constraints.
Yes, exactly.
Increasingly unlikely constraints. Right. It has to do this. That's already hard. Well, you add 4 more impossibilities to that. It's like,
Right. And where I want to go with this is that kind of hubris about reason is, I think, first of all, it's a characteristic of the modern era because you have Descartes saying we're going to be masters and possessors of nature, and if you read the Discourse on Method,
Nietzsche, we're going to
do these
form
things.
our own values.
Right. But that's sort of the end of the whole kind of decay. But if we go back to the early moderns, he even suggests in the Discourse on Method that maybe medicine will make all the infirmities of old age sort of disappear, which means we're not going to die. In which case, by the way, the religious question is gone. Like Descartes' writing, he doesn't want his books to be placed on the index, which they were, nonetheless, and so they're read and they have to be, the Roman Catholic Church has to look at them. But the fact is that Roman Catholicism is irrelevant if we're not going to die, right? I mean, in some fundamental sense. But okay.
Well, whatever a human being is something completely different than whatever it is now.
But now I want to go back to Leo Strauss, who talks about the permanent questions. And what I've come to understand is the following, that the permanence of the questions arises from the necessity that Athens, so to speak, and now let's just take that to mean reason, like unaided reason, okay, can't be separated from the biblical alternative, which is the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
How did you figure that out?
Well, Strauss writes about this stuff. He writes about, this is not my ideas, he writes about Athens and Jerusalem. But what I'm claiming is this. In order for reason to function in a healthy way, it must conduct itself in the light of the alternative of religion, which is, like you can't understand everything on your own. There are massive mysteries, right? And there's this entire alternative way of thinking about things. So if you simply separate reason from that, you're going to get totalitarianism and kind of, the lunacy that we see.
Luciferian hubris.
If you separate religion from the alternative that, well, man has reason and man is able to figure things out, and there are things that we can understand about nature and the world and science that aren't in the religious tradition, then you're going to end up with, say, Islamic extremism or something. You see what I'm saying? In other words, a healthy human existence is to dwell in the space of the permanent questions, which must be informed by these alternatives. And Strauss is very good on this. He says, there's no philosophical proof that the Bible is wrong, right? Like there's, like, you know, you could, like, you're always making assumptions that they're simply going to sort of, you know, prejudice the conclusions that you're going to.
Yeah.
So we have to live in this space. And Strauss's claim, which I really think is great, is that the tension between Athens and Jerusalem is the coiled spring of the greatness of the West, that we have to understand that.
Right. Oh, yeah,
but now what I've come to understand, this is a kind of moderation, right? Like, because if you say, no, reason's it, anything that's not rational, you got some kind of positivism or whatever, you're going to go straight to that man-God thing, right?
Yeah.
You're going to go straight to that totalitarian. You know, the train's going to stop at the, you know, at the death camp, basically. But if you also say, no, there's no which is one more thing I just want to say about my book on Plato and the Talmud. I've already suggested that Socratic philosophizing begins with this revelation at Delphi, which Socrates takes seriously. Who is Socrates? What is wisdom? But he's convinced that there must be an answer because the God can't speak falsely. The rabbis, there's a great book called Rational Rabbis by a guy named Menachem Fish. And believe it or not, he talks about the rabbis of the Talmud. The first 40 pages is about Karl Popper's theory of falsification in science, which is a great, humble theory, right? It's that we can't prove laws like the law of gravity. We can only falsify them. We can conduct experiments that if they turn out a certain way, will falsify the, you know, formulation of the law of gravity.
Look for new forms of our ignorance.
Right. So then this guy argues that the rabbis are rational, and they are in a sense. They're playing the Socratic game of rationality within the horizon of revelation.